My son and daughter-in-law took over my house and looked at me like I was a stranger. "You're nothing but a useless burden," he said. "You are no longer my father." I left with 3 garbage bags and spent my nights under a bridge among the homeless trying to survive the cold and the shame. Then one morning a man in an expensive suit walked toward me, sat beside me on the cardboard and said I was the missing heir to a family fortune worth $200 million. Thank you for being here with me. Before we begin, I have one request. Drop a comment and tell me what are you doing right now while you listen, driving, working, just sitting quietly. I read every one. Quick note. Some details in this story are fictionalized to highlight the lesson. What matters most is the message it carries. I sat at the kitchen table knowing tonight would destroy everything, though I didn't yet know how. The table was scarred oak worn smooth by 30 years of breakfasts and homework sessions and birthday cakes. I'd bought it the week after Celine left, needed something solid to anchor the house when everything else felt like it was sinking. Riker was 4 then. Now he was 30, and the table was still here, and so was I waiting. At 59, I'd taught high school English for 3 decades, graded 10,000 essays about Romeo and Juliet's bad decisions, raised my son alone after his mother walked out. Never imagined I'd be sitting in my own kitchen feeling like a guest. 6 months ago, Riker had brought papers to this table. "Just a formality, Dad," he'd said, sliding the documents across the oak surface between our coffee mugs. "For my mortgage application. They need proof of family assets." His voice was steady, casual, the same tone he'd used at 16 when he wanted to borrow the car. I'd signed without reading, carefully trusted the boy I'd raised to tell me the truth. Vivian had watched from the doorway that day, her lawyer's eyes cool and calculating. I should have known then. Last week, she'd looked at me across this same table with something new in her expression, not dislike, which I was used to, but assessment. The way you'd look at furniture you were planning to discard. She'd smiled when I'd asked if she wanted more coffee. That smile had kept me awake for 3 nights. Now I heard the car in the driveway, the engine's rumble cutting through the November evening. 7:45 p.m., 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. The distinctive click of Vivian's heels on the front porch. They were here. I didn't stand up. Some instinct told me to stay seated, stay grounded, stay connected to this table and everything it meant. The front door opened without a knock. Their house, their keys, their right to enter. I heard Riker's voice in the entryway, low and tense, and Vivian's sharp reply, then footsteps. Riker walked into the living room first. 30 years old, corporate posture he'd perfected working in tech, though I'd later learn he'd been secretly unemployed for 3 months. He didn't sit down. Neither did Vivian, who followed in designer heels that cost more than my monthly pension. She was 33, sharp-minded, always 3 moves ahead in conversations. They stood. I sat. The power dynamic was clear. "Dad," Riker said. Not "Hi, Dad," or "Hey, how are you?" Just the title stripped of warmth. "Riker," I replied, matched his tone exactly. "Vivian." She nodded, didn't speak. This was Riker's play to make. For 30 years, I'd sat at this table as father, teacher, protector, never once as guest, never once as burden. "We need to talk," Riker said. The 4 words everyone dreads. He glanced at Vivian, who gave a slight nod, permission to continue. "Vivian and I, we're ready to start a family. We need our own space, you understand." I understood the words, didn't understand what they had to do with me. "I'm happy for you," I said carefully. "A grandchild. That's wonderful news." "We need the whole house," Vivian cut in. Her voice was clean, surgical. "It's time for you to find your own place." The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, a car passed on Oakwood Drive. Everything normal, everything wrong. "This is my house," I said quietly. "I bought it 31 years ago. I've lived here since before you were born, Riker." "No," Riker said. He pulled a folded document from his jacket pocket. Those papers you signed 6 months ago, they transferred the deed to me. This is my house now, legally. You signed it over. The floor didn't drop out from under me. The walls didn't spin. Everything stayed exactly where it was, but suddenly I was the thing out of place. You said it was for your mortgage application, I heard myself say. I said it was financial paperwork, Riker corrected. His face was stone. You didn't read it carefully. That's not my fault. Vivian stepped forward. We're not throwing you out tonight. You have 2 hours to pack essentials. We'll give you until Friday to collect everything else. 2 hours. 30 years compressed into garbage bags and cardboard boxes. Riker, I said, tried to find my son in the stranger's face. Why? His jaw tightened. You're nothing but a useless burden, he said. The words came out hard rehearsed. You are no longer my father. There it was. The lie Celine had told him 15 years ago when he was 15 and angry and desperate for a reason why his mother had vanished from his life. She'd called him out of nowhere after 11 years of silence, needed someone to blame for her choices, and chosen me. How does a man defend himself against a lie he's spent 26 years protecting? I could have spoken then. Could have told Riker about the phone call in 1996 when Celine said she'd met someone richer, someone better, someone who could give her the life she deserved. Could have shown him the divorce papers marked voluntary separation, her signature confident and clear. Could have read him the letters she'd written to her sister about the new boyfriend's lake house and his investment portfolio. But I'd promised myself when he was 4 years old crying for his mother that I would never make him choose between believing in her or believing in me. I'd let him keep one parent pure in his mind, even if it meant I became the villain. That promise was the only thing I had left to keep. I'm sorry you believe that, I said finally. Riker's face twisted. Maybe disappointment that I wouldn't fight, wouldn't defend myself. Maybe relief. 2 hours, Vivian repeated. She checked her watch, actually timed it. It's 7:53 now. We'll be back at 9:53. They left through the front door, got back in their car, drove away, giving me privacy to pack my life or maybe just not wanting to watch. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd helped Riker with fractions and vocabulary homework, where we'd eaten Sunday pancakes, and Thanksgiving turkey, where I'd signed papers 6 months ago that made me homeless. The silence after the door slammed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I could have told Riker the truth about his mother's phone call. I could have shown him the divorce papers, the letters, the evidence that Celine had chosen to leave, had invented her story to keep his love when she finally called. But I said nothing. That silence in a house that was no longer mine would cost me everything. 2 hours later, Vivian was throwing my clothes into a black garbage bag like I was already dead. 9:15 p.m. November rain had turned the backyard into mud and fallen leaves. She stood in the doorway, dry under the porch light, tossing shirts and pants onto the concrete. I gathered them silently, stuffed them into the 3 contractor bags she'd provided. "Just take what you need," she called out. "We're donating the rest." I picked through the pile methodically. Work pants, a winter coat. The photo from Riker's 7th birthday, the one where he's holding the cardboard rocket we'd built together, and the watch. The watch was silver, a Timex with a scratched face. My foster father had given it to me when I turned 18, the day I left his house in Pueblo. Harold Hale, not my birth father, just the man who'd raised me from age 4. He'd died when I was 23, never told me where I'd come from, never explained why I had no birth certificate before the adoption papers. The watch was my only connection to a past I didn't understand. I slipped it into my jacket pocket. "Dad?" Riker's voice from the doorway behind Vivian. She turned, blocked him slightly, but I could see his face. His voice cracked on the single syllable. "Dad, I picked up the 3 garbage bags. Turn around and I'd beg. I'd ask him to reconsider, to remember the homework help and the Little League practices and the college fund I'd built working summer school for 15 years. I'd become pathetic." I kept walking. My Honda was parked at the curb, a 2005 Civic with 200,000 miles. I threw the bags in the back seat, got behind the wheel, turned the key. In the rearview mirror, I saw Riker on the porch watching. Vivian's hand was on his shoulder, steering him back inside. I drove. 30 years of a life fit into 3 garbage bags, everything I'd built measured in weight I could lift alone. By 2 a.m., I was parked in a 24-hour lot downtown near the 16th Street Mall. The cold was brutal. -5 degrees, the dashboard thermometer said. I'd turned off the engine an hour ago to save gas. $47 in my wallet. My phone was dead, no charger, and even if I'd had one, who would I call? I stared at the photo of 7-year-old Riker from his birthday party. He was laughing, gap-toothed, holding that cardboard rocket like it was real. That was 2003 years after Celine left. I remembered that year like a scar that never healed right. Riker had cried every night for 6 months. "Don't leave me like Mommy did Daddy," he'd say, clinging to my neck at bedtime. I'd sung him to sleep every single night, Beatles songs, folk songs, made-up lullabies about brave boys and fathers who never left. That was also the year the superintendent called me into her office with an offer assistant principal position in Colorado Springs, double my salary, better school's career advancement. I'd said no within 30 seconds. Riker needed stability, needed to stay in the house where his mother's memory lived. "You're making a mistake," the superintendent had said. "You could do so much more." I'd stayed. I'd raised my son. I'd sacrificed the promotion for his stability, the money for his comfort, the career for his childhood. What does it profit a man to sacrifice everything for his son only to have that son sign away his father's shelter? The question hung in the frozen air unanswered. I pulled my coat tighter, tried to position myself across the front seats. My breath fogged the windows, turned them opaque with frost. The street lights outside became blurred halos of orange. The homeless shelters were 12 blocks away and already full. I'd called 3 from a payphone before my phone died. My eyes burned but wouldn't close. Every time I started to drift, I'd jerk awake, afraid of freezing, afraid of cops, afraid of everything this night represented. Sometime around 2:30 a.m., there was a tap on the driver's side window. I jolted upright, heart hammering. Through the frosted glass, I could barely make out a silhouette, someone standing in the -5-degree cold. Another tap, gentler. "Hey," a voice called, muffled by the glass. "You okay in there? It's -5 tonight." I didn't answer. Didn't know how to answer. Was I okay? I was 59 years old, sleeping in my car. Everything I owned in garbage bags in my back seat. "I'm fine," I finally called back, voice rough. The silhouette didn't move. "There's a warming shelter on Colfax. Open all night. You shouldn't stay out here." "I'm fine," I repeated. A pause. Then, "Okay, stay warm." Footsteps crunching away on frozen pavement. I sat in the dark, staring at the frosted window where the stranger had stood. Someone had looked at my car and seen exactly what I was: not a man having a bad night, but homeless. They'd recognized it before I'd fully accepted it myself. I was no longer a homeowner. No longer a father with a house to return to. I was homeless, sleeping in a car in a parking lot, and strangers could tell just by looking. That's when I understood I'd crossed an invisible line tonight. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't fixable with a phone call or an apology. This was my life now, and the world had already started seeing me differently. Through the frosted window, I could barely make out the silhouette walking away, someone standing in -5-degree cold, concerned about me. That's when I understood I was no longer a homeowner having a bad night. I was homeless. And this stranger, whoever they were, recognized it before I did. 5 days later, when my Honda's fuel pump died in the middle of Lawrence Street, I would discover there are people who see the invisible. 5 days later, the stranger's words still echoed. "You shouldn't stay out here." I'd stayed anyway, 4 more nights in the Honda, moving parking lots each dawn to avoid attention. But on the 5th morning, the car made a sound I'd never heard before, a wet, grinding death rattle that echoed my own descent. 7:30 a.m. on Broadway, 3 blocks from downtown Denver. The engine coughed, shuddered, died. I coasted to the curb in front of a auto repair shop, the kind with stained concrete and faded signs advertising oil changes. The steering wheel was cold under my hands. The dashboard went dark. I sat there for 5 minutes, maybe 10, knowing what came next. A mechanic emerged from the bay, wiping his hands on a red rag. He was maybe 40, weathered face, the look of a man who'd delivered bad news before. Ray, his name tag said. "Won't start," he called. I got out, nodded. "Died while I was driving." He popped the hood, poked around for 30 seconds. "Fuel pumps shot," he said, straightening up. $1,800 to replace maybe 2 days' work. $1,800. I opened my wallet, slowly counted the bills inside. $28. A tank of gas 3 days ago had cost more than everything I had left. "You want me to tow it somewhere?" Ray asked. His voice was kind, practiced. "Storage lot's 40 a day, or I can move it to the back lot here, no charge for a week while you figure things out." Figure things out, as if this was a problem that could be solved with planning, with time, with anything other than money I didn't have. "Just leave it," I said. "I'll come back." We both knew I wouldn't. I pulled my 3 garbage bags from the back seat while Ray pretended not to notice. Everything I owned compressed and portable. The watch was still in my jacket pocket. The photo of 7-year-old Riker was in my wallet next to the $28. "Sorry, man," Ray said. "Wish the news was better." "Thank you for checking," I replied, kept my voice level, dignified, as if I was just another customer with a car problem instead of a man watching his last shelter die on a public street. I walked away from the Honda like a man leaving his own grave, unable to bury it, unable to resurrect it, only able to walk. For an hour I wandered downtown Denver, carrying those garbage bags, no destination, no plan. The morning commute flowed around me, people in cars, people on buses, people walking to offices with coffee cups and briefcases. I'd been one of them 5 days ago. Now I was invisible. That's when I saw Lawrence Street Bridge. I'd driven over it thousands of times, never looking down. It was just an overpass, concrete and graffiti, part of the city's infrastructure I'd needed to cross to reach Jefferson High School every morning for 30 years. But now on foot, the angle was different. Beneath the bridge was an underpass, and beneath the underpass were people. Cardboard shelters leaned against the concrete supports. Shopping carts clustered like metal sculptures. Small groups huddled around warming fires in metal barrels, the smoke rising through the gaps in the bridge above. The smell of burning wood and something else, humanity compressed into limited space. For 30 years I'd driven over this bridge to Jefferson High School, never once looking down at the people living beneath my commute. I stood at the top of the embankment, garbage bags in hand. This was the line, the real line. The car had been a buffer, a mobile wall between me and the word homeless. Now there was nothing left to cross. I walked down. The underpass was bigger than it looked from above. Maybe 50 people scattered across the concrete expanse, some sleeping, some talking in quiet groups, some just staring at nothing. Nobody looked at me directly, but I felt the assessment. The recognition, new arrival, still clean, not yet broken. A man approached. 61, maybe older, with a graying beard and eyes that had seen too much but still held kindness. He wore a heavy coat, carried a dented metal bowl, and held himself with unexpected dignity. "First day under?" he asked. His voice was educated, measured. "You look like you drove past here 1,000 times. 5 days ago," I said. Didn't know why I was honest. "My son evicted me." He nodded, didn't press for details. "Gideon Marsh," he said, extending a hand. "Civil engineer, was civil engineer, been here 3 years. I shook his hand. "Prescott Hale, teacher, was teacher." "The was gets easier," Gideon said. "Come on. Breakfast run came by an hour ago, but Tessa saves extras." He led me deeper under the bridge, where a woman in her late 50s ladled soup from a large thermos into Gideon's bowl. She was bundled in 3 coat scarves wrapped around her neck, but her smile was immediate and warm. "New face," she said, not a question. "Prescott," Gideon said, his first morning. "Tessa Caldwell," the woman said, handing me a bowl without asking if I wanted one. Eat first, talk later. It's cold today. The soup was hot canned vegetable, nothing fancy, but it burned my throat in the best way. I hadn't eaten anything warm in 3 days. The last hot meal had been in my own kitchen at my own table in a house that was no longer mine. Thank you, I managed. Nobody asks your story here, Tessa said. We all got one. Most of them are bad. Yours probably is too. I nodded, couldn't speak around the lump in my throat. These people, these strangers I'd driven past for decades, these invisible citizens I'd never thought about were offering me food, warmth, basic human kindness without demanding explanation or judgment. Gideon settled onto a piece of cardboard beside me, still clutching a battered leather briefcase with a combination lock, the kind lawyers carried. In 5 days, I'd lost a house, a car, my dignity, my identity. But this man who'd offered me food before asking my name guarded that briefcase like it contained his soul. What's in there? I asked, nodding at the case. Gideon's hand tightened on the handle. The one thing people can't take from me, he said. Over the next 2 days, I would learn the unwritten rules of survival that no 30-year teaching career had prepared me for. But in that moment, finishing soup under a bridge I'd never looked at, I learned the first lesson. Sometimes the people you've ignored your whole life are the only ones who see you when you disappear. By day 6, I'd spent 30 years teaching algebra and Shakespeare to teenagers who didn't want to learn them. Now a homeless civil engineer was teaching me how to survive until breakfast, and I absorbed every word like my life depended on it, because it did. 5:20 a.m., still dark, cold enough to see your breath in clouds. Gideon shook me awake on the cardboard under Lawrence Street Bridge. Denver rescue mission, he said. We walk now or we don't eat. I learned the first law that morning, 5:30 sharp, or you're eating sidewalk. The mission served 60 people. 100 waited in line every morning. If you arrived at 5:31, you watched others eat through the window. Gideon and I made it with 90 seconds to spare. The line stretched around the building, people stamping feet against the cold breath, forming a collective fog. When the doors opened, the surge forward was controlled but desperate. Hot oatmeal, weak coffee, 2 slices of bread. I'd eaten worse at teacher conferences, but I'd never been this grateful. Eat slow, Gideon said. Makes it last longer. Your stomach's not used to this schedule yet. After breakfast came the shower. $10 for a day pass at the YMCA on Broadway, nearly half of what I had left. But Gideon insisted. You stop showering, you stop being human, he said. People start seeing you different. Cops move you along faster. Cashiers watch you closer. Your mind goes next. The hot water was a baptism. I stood under the spray for 20 minutes until someone knocked on the stall door. When I emerged, Gideon handed me a disposable razor he'd gotten from the front desk. Every 3 days minimum, he said. The beard makes you invisible faster. By 9 a.m., we were at the Denver Public Library. Tessa met us at the entrance, bundled in her 3 coats despite the building's warmth. Third floor history section, she said, leading us past the checkout desk. Warmest spot, fewest people. Don't fall asleep or they'll ban you. We spent the day there. Gideon actually read thick engineering textbooks he pulled from the shelves. Tessa worked crossword puzzles from the newspaper section. I pretended to read Steinbeck, but mostly I watched. These people had created a system, a shadow society with rules more intricate than any classroom management plan I'd used. They knew which librarian would let you stay past closing if you were quiet, which security guard would wake you gently versus call the cops, which bathroom stall had the best lock for changing clothes. See that guy by the computers? Tessa whispered, nodding toward a man in a stained jacket. He's been 86'd from 4 libraries, screamed at a clerk. You can't come back from that, the system talks. How do you teach someone who's been teaching for 30 years that everything he knew about survival was fantasy? At 9 p.m., the library closed. We walked back to Lawrence Street Bridge in the November cold. Gideon showed me how to layer cardboard for insulation, which concrete support blocked the wind best, where to keep your shoes so they wouldn't get stolen while you slept. Never take both shoes off at once, he said. Sleep with one on. Thieves don't want a single shoe. I taught Lord of the Flies for 20 years. Thought I understood what happened when civilization broke down. I'd understood nothing. By week 2, I'd memorized the schedule: 5:30 a.m. mission, 7 a.m. YMCA, 9 a.m. library, 9 p.m. return to bridge. My money was down to $14. I'd learned to skip the YMCA every other day, to stuff newspaper under my coat for warmth, to recognize the churches that gave out free dinners on witch nights. But I still didn't understand the briefcase. Gideon carried it everywhere, never set it down. When he slept on cardboard under the bridge, he wrapped both arms around it like a child holding a teddy bear. It was battered brown leather, scratched and stained with a combination lock that looked decades old. One night around 11 p.m., another man sleeping near us whispered loud enough for me to hear. "That case," he muttered to his companion. "Gotta be money or drugs. Why else guard it like that?" I'd wondered the same thing. In 2 weeks under the bridge, I'd seen people guard bottles of vodka, prescription pills, even a pair of good boots. But Gideon's intensity was different. This wasn't about market value. This was about identity. He caught me staring that night. The bridge lights cast his face in shadow, made his eyes look ancient. "Not money," he said quietly. "Not drugs. Just the only thing people can't take from me." "What is it?" I asked. He was quiet for a long time. Around us, the bridge community settled into sleep, coughs, snores, the rustle of plastic bags. Finally, he spoke. "I was a civil engineer, designed bridges, buildings, water systems. 27 years, never missed a deadline, never cut corners. Then my firm got bought by developers who wanted me to sign off on foundation specs I knew were dangerous. I refused. They fired me, blacklisted me industry-wide, sent letters to every firm saying I was unstable, liability risk, couldn't be trusted." He patted the briefcase. "This has my originals, designs, blueprints, calculations, everything I created before they stole my name. Someday someone will see these and know I was right, know I wasn't crazy or incompetent, know I existed." Under this bridge, the briefcase Gideon clutched was more valuable than my 30 years of pension, because it couldn't be foreclosed, signed away, or stolen by a son. "They took your career," I said, "but not your work." "They took my career," he agreed, "but they can't take what I know, can't take what I created. Long as I have these designs, I'm still an engineer. Without them, I'm just a crazy homeless man with a story nobody believes." I understood then. The briefcase wasn't about money or drugs or anything with street value. It was about proof. Proof that you existed, proof that you mattered, proof that before the world erased you, you'd built something real. I lay on cardboard that night thinking about Gideon's words, "the only thing people can't take from me." In 2 weeks, I'd learned where to eat, sleep, and shower. But I still didn't know what was worth guarding when you had nothing left. Maybe it was the proof that once before you became invisible, you'd been seen. Week 3 would teach me. There were things more dangerous under this bridge than cold or hunger. There was the risk of forgetting you were human at all. Gideon's briefcase held proof he'd existed before the world erased him. Week 2 taught me something harder. Dignity isn't what you keep when you have nothing, it's what you share. Day 10, 4:30 in the afternoon, I stood outside the Denver rescue mission for the first time. The red brick building looked exactly like what it was, institutional charity last resort. The line stretched around the corner. 60 people, maybe more. I'd driven past this place for 30 years, never stopped, never looked. Now I was part of the line I'd ignored. Tessa appeared beside me, thrust something into my hands. Half a loaf of bread wrapped in plastic. "Eat before you go in," she said. "Line's 60 deep. Kitchen's got food for 40. I tried to hand it back. "You need this more than 25 years I ran a surgical ward," she cut me off. "Don't tell me who needs to eat." I ate the bread standing there. Plain white bread, the cheapest kind. It tasted like survival. I was head nurse at Lutheran Medical Center, Tessa said, leaning against the wall. 25 years, ran post-surgical, managed 30 nurses, never lost a patient to preventable complications. She watched the line shuffle forward. Then I found the Medicare fraud. Doctors billing for procedures they never performed. Equipment ordered but never delivered. $3 million over 2 years. I reported it. They thanked me, said they'd investigate. 2 weeks later, I was fired for creating a hostile work environment. Blacklisted throughout Colorado healthcare. Lost everything within 3 months. For doing the right thing, I said. For doing the right thing, she agreed. And I'd do it again. Tessa had lost everything for doing what was right, and she'd do it again under this bridge. That kind of integrity was more common than in any boardroom I'd ever imagined. The line moved forward. We didn't get food that day, ran out before we reached the door. But Tessa's bread kept me alive, and her story changed how I saw this place. These weren't people who'd failed. They were people who'd refused to fail in ways that mattered. Week 3, the cold got serious. 2 a.m., November 23rd, -8 Celsius. Cold enough to kill. I woke to rasping, wet breathing that shouldn't have been coming from a human throat. Jacob Whitfield lay 3 cardboard squares away. 67 Gulf War veteran with hollow eyes and untreated PTSD. He'd been at the bridge 5 years, one of the invisible men who'd served their country and been forgotten by it. Now he was dying. His skin was purple-gray. His breathing came in shallow, irregular gasps. Hypothermia advanced stage. I'd read about it in the library. Confusion, drowsiness, weak pulse, unconsciousness, death. No one else was awake. I had one thick jacket. A quilted Carhartt, the only thing keeping me alive through November nights. Without it, I'd be where Jacob was within hours. I didn't think, just moved. The jacket left my shoulders like a piece of my old life. Warm, protective, practical, and I knew I'd never get it back, knew I might not survive the night without it, and didn't care. I covered Jacob with it, tucked it around his shoulders. His skin was ice. "Gideon!" I shouted, shaking his shoulder. "Help me, he's dying, we need to call someone." Gideon woke instantly, saw Jacob moved. Together we pulled him to the wall out of the wind. Gideon started CPR while I ran to find the night security guard 3 blocks away. "Please," I gasped. "Man dying under bridge, need phone, need 911. The guard handed me his cell, called it in himself while I ran back. Gideon was still doing compressions. Jacob's lips were blue. His chest barely moved under the jacket. "Keep going," I said. Gideon kept going. 7 minutes later, ambulance lights strobed blue and red across the concrete. Paramedics moved fast, professional. They had equipment, oxygen, heating, blankets. "He was dying," Gideon told them, breathing hard. "This man gave him his only jacket in -8 degrees. That's why the old guy's still breathing." One paramedic looked at me shirtless, except for 2 thin layers, shivering so hard I could barely stand. "You need to get warm," she said. "You want to come with us?" I shook my head. Didn't have insurance, didn't have money. Jacob needed that ambulance more than I did. They loaded him onto the stretcher. His pulse was back weak, but there. The paramedic wrapped him in heating blankets, started an IV. My Carhartt jacket stayed around his shoulders. "He'll make it," she said. "You saved his life." The ambulance pulled away, lights fading. I sat on cardboard in -8 degrees, shivering so hard my teeth cracked together, and thought, this is who I am. Not the man who lost a house. Not the teacher who turned down promotions. Not the father whose son evicted him. The man who gave his jacket away in the coldest night of the year because another human being needed it more. 3 weeks ago I'd owned a house, a car, a pension. Tonight I owned nothing. And tonight I'd saved a life. Under this bridge I'd found something I didn't know. I'd lost proof that I was still human, still capable of sacrifice, still able to choose someone else's survival over my own comfort. Gideon sat down beside me, draped his own blanket across my shoulders. It wasn't enough to stop the shivering, but it was something. 4 days, he said quietly. A man in a suit will come looking for you. Expensive suit. Asks a lot of questions. Don't run. What? I said through chattering teeth. Just don't run, Gideon repeated. Sometimes the universe decides you've suffered enough. I sat on that cardboard in -8 degrees, shivering so hard my teeth cracked together, and thought, this is who I am. Not the man who lost a house, not the teacher who turned down promotions, the man who gave his jacket away in the coldest night of the year because another human being needed it more. Under this bridge, I'd found something I didn't know I'd lost. 4 days later, a man in a $3,000 suit would sit down beside me on that same cardboard and turn my entire understanding of reality inside out. 4 days after I gave away my jacket, a black sedan pulled up to Lawrence Street Bridge, and a man in a $3,000 suit stepped out like he'd arrived at the wrong address. 9 a.m. week 4. I was sitting on cardboard drinking instant coffee someone had shared, still wearing Gideon's thin blanket because I had nothing else. The cold hadn't killed me yet, but it was trying. The sedan was out of place, new, clean, expensive. The kind of car that didn't park under bridges unless someone was lost or looking for trouble. I watched the driver's door open. Montgomery Ashford was 51. Though he looked younger in that tailored black suit and polished leather shoes. His face was clean-shaven, his hair perfectly cut. He carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my last paycheck. Managing attorney for Blackthorn Holdings, though I didn't know that yet. He'd been searching for me for 3 months, with the devotion of a man honoring a dying client's final wish. He walked into the homeless camp like he belonged there, not tentative, not disgusted, just purposeful. He stopped at different cardboard squares, asking names, showing something from his briefcase. "Excuse me, sir," he said to Gideon. "May I ask your name? I'm looking for someone." Gideon pointed at me. Montgomery walked over, stood above my cardboard square. His shoes were immaculate. His suit fit perfectly. Everything about him screamed money, power, control, everything I'd lost. "Sir," he said, "may I ask your name?" I looked up at him suspicious. Debt collector, maybe. Or undercover cop. Maybe Riker had sent someone to check if I was still alive so he could sleep better at night. "I'm not signing anything," I said. "I don't owe anyone money. Whatever you're selling, I don't want it." "I'm not here to collect anything," Montgomery said. His voice was calm, educated, patient. "I'm searching for someone. May I ask your name?" "No." He stood there for a moment, then did something I'll never forget. He sat down, on cardboard, in a $3,000 suit. The concrete was filthy oil stains, food scraps, dirt ground in by months of bodies sleeping there. His suit touched it all. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, just sat down cross-legged like we were having coffee in his office. "I'll sit here until you're ready to listen," he said. "I have nowhere more important to be." Around us, the bridge community had gone quiet. Everyone watching this clean man in his perfect suit sitting on our cardboard like it didn't matter. "Who are you?" I finally asked. "Montgomery Ashford, attorney. I'm searching for someone who might not know he's being searched for." "I'm nobody," I said. "Wrong person." "Maybe," he agreed. "Or maybe not. Give me 10 minutes. If I'm wrong, I'll leave and you'll never see me again. If I'm right, your life changes today." Something in his voice made me believe him. Not hope, just belief. 10 minutes, I said. We moved to a quieter area near a concrete pillar. Montgomery opened his briefcase, carefully removed 3 items like they were sacred relics. The first was a photograph, black and white edges worn. A summer fair 1970, I could see the date stamp in the corner. A little boy, maybe 7 years old, holding cotton candy, smiling at the camera. Happy, safe, loved. The second was a document, thick paper, official letterhead, dense text I couldn't read from where I sat. The third was a bracelet. Silver, small enough for a child's wrist, engraved with ornate symbols I didn't recognize. On the inside, barely visible, 1963. Montgomery laid them out on the cardboard between us like evidence at a trial. "This photograph was taken at the Colorado State Fair summer 1970, he said. "This bracelet was worn by a 7-year-old boy that day. Do you recognize either?" I stared at the photo. The boy looked familiar in a way I couldn't place. Like seeing your reflection in water, you know it's you, but distorted, impossible to grasp. I've never seen. I stopped. The bracelet. I held that bracelet, cold silver, warming in my palm, and somewhere beneath 30 years of teaching, beneath 3 weeks of homelessness, beneath 59 years of being Prescott Hale, something stirred that felt like memory without images. "What is this?" My voice came out rough. "This," Montgomery said, tapping the document, "is a preliminary DNA report. We obtained a sample from your foster father's estate after his death. Cross-referenced it with the Blackthorn family database. It's not conclusive yet. We'd need a direct sample from you for that, but it's suggestive." "Suggestive of what?" Montgomery met my eyes. "Are you Prescott Hale, born or adopted in 1963, raised by Harold Hale in Pueblo, Colorado?" "Yes," I said. Didn't see the point in lying. "Then I need to tell you something that will sound impossible. In 1970, a 7-year-old boy named Prescott Blackthorn was kidnapped from the Colorado State Fair by his uncle Cornelius Blackthorn. The boy was never found. The family searched for decades. The patriarch Alistair Blackthorn spent millions on investigators, never gave up hope. He died 2 years ago, still looking." My hands were shaking. The bracelet trembled in my palm. "Before he died," Montgomery continued, "Alistair made me promise to continue the search. 3 months ago, we found records of a child adopted by Harold Hale in 1967, a child with no birth certificate, no history before the adoption, just paperwork that barely met legal standards. We obtained DNA samples from Harold's estate. We compared them to Alistair's DNA." He paused. "If you're who I believe you are, you're not Prescott Hale, the retired teacher. You're Prescott Blackthorn, kidnapped in 1970, missing for 52 years, raised under a different name by people who may or may not have known the truth. And you're the sole legitimate heir to Blackthorn Holdings." "How much?" I heard myself ask. "The estate is worth approximately $200 million. The number was so large it didn't feel real. Like saying the moon was made of cheese, technically words but meaningless. The bracelet sat in my palm, small and silver and impossibly familiar. Montgomery was watching my face. "You feel it, don't you?" he said quietly. "Even if you don't remember." And I did. I felt something I couldn't name, couldn't explain, couldn't deny. Like the bracelet had been part of me once, like my body remembered what my mind had forgotten. "I don't remember," I whispered. "You were 4 years old," Montgomery said gently. "Most people don't remember much before 5, but the body remembers, the heart remembers." That night, I would lie awake on cardboard thinking about the foster father's watch in my pocket, and wondering if the man who raised me knew more than he'd ever said. That night I couldn't sleep, not because of the cold or the concrete, but because Montgomery Ashford had taken 59 years of my life and rewritten every page. 11 p.m. The bridge was quiet except for coughs and shifting bodies. Gideon snored softly, his briefcase clutched to his chest. I lay on cardboard, staring at the concrete ceiling, holding the silver bracelet Montgomery had left with me. He'd driven away with a promise to return in 3 days with arrangements for DNA testing. 3 days to decide if I believed him. The bracelet was small, cold, real. Ornate symbols I didn't recognize, the year 1963 stamped inside. My birth year, or the year Prescott Blackthorn was born before he was kidnapped and became Prescott Hale. I tried to remember being 4 years old. Tried to pull up images of that Colorado State Fair in 1970. Nothing came. Just the familiar blankness that had always been there when I reached back before age 5. Age 5, when Harold Hale took me in. I hadn't thought about Harold in months, but now I couldn't stop thinking about the man who raised me. Harold was a gentle widower who worked at the Pueblo post office. 50 years old when he adopted me in 1968, gray-haired and soft-spoken. He'd never explained where I came from. Just said, "You're my son now. That's all that matters. The past doesn't matter, only what comes next." For 54 years, I'd believed that statement was love. Now it felt like concealment. I remembered asking when I was maybe 12, sitting at our kitchen table doing homework. But where did I come from? Who were my real parents? Harold had looked up from his newspaper. "I'm your real parent," he'd said. "Want to learn how to tie fishing knots?" The conversation shifted. We spent the evening with rope and diagrams, and I'd forgotten the question I'd asked. How many times had he done that? How many questions had he deflected with homework, help fishing trips, pancake breakfasts? Who am I if not Prescott Hale, the name I've carried for 59 years, the name on my teaching certificate, the name my son hates? Harold had been careful, never spoke about adoption except to say it was final, legal, permanent. When I'd turned 18 and asked about my birth certificate, he'd shown me adoption papers from 1971 that barely met legal standards, a judge's signature, a case number, no details. I'd accepted it because Harold loved me. He'd raised me alone, worked double shifts to pay for my college, taught me how to be decent. He died when I was 44, left me the house and the watch. The watch. I pulled it from my pocket, the silver Timex I'd worn for 30 years, until I'd taken it off to keep it safe under the bridge. Harold had given it to me when I turned 18. "My father gave this to me," Harold had said, strapping it to my wrist. "Now I'm giving it to you. Time is the only thing we really own. Use yours wisely." I'd worn it every day for 41 years. Through teaching marriage, divorce, Riker's childhood. Even homeless, I'd kept it safe. The man who raised me is dead, buried 15 years with all his secrets, and I'll never know if his love was real or if I was just the stolen child he decided to keep. I held the watch in one hand, the bracelet in the other. Both silver, both mysteries. Harold left me this watch. The man who kidnapped me, Cornelius Blackthorne, had left his son stolen assets worth millions. What did a watch mean when both men might have been hiding the same crime? Montgomery had said Alistair Blackthorne searched for 50 years. Harold raised me for 54 years. One man spent his life looking. The other spent his life hiding what he'd found. Or maybe Harold had been innocent, had adopted a child through legitimate channels, had no idea the boy came from a kidnapping. Maybe the adoption agency had lied to him. But that didn't explain the deflections. The careful avoidance, the way he'd redirected every question about my past like he was protecting a secret. The bracelet felt familiar. This watch felt like a lie, and I didn't know which frightened me more. Around me, the bridge slept. 50 people who'd lost everything, who knew exactly who they were because they'd watched themselves fall. I envied them that certainty. I'd thought I knew who I was. Prescott Hale, 59, retired teacher, failed father, homeless man learning to survive. Now Montgomery was telling me I was Prescott Blackthorne, kidnapped heir, missing person, the answer to a 50-year search. Both versions couldn't be true, except the bracelet felt familiar, and the watch felt heavy with questions Harold had never answered. I thought about Riker, who'd evicted me believing I'd driven his mother away. He'd spent his whole life hating me for something I didn't do, and I'd stayed silent to protect Celine's memory. Truth and lies so tangled I couldn't tell them apart. Maybe that's what Harold had done. Tangled truth and lies so thoroughly that love and crime became indistinguishable. Maybe he'd convinced himself that raising me well justified however he'd gotten me. Or maybe Montgomery was wrong. Maybe I was reaching for fantasy because reality, homeless, abandoned, broke, was too hard to bear. I held Harold's watch until the metal warmed in my palm. If Montgomery is right, I've been living someone else's life for 59 years. If he's wrong, I've been lying on this cardboard waiting for a fantasy. Either way, I needed to know. The bracelet gleamed in my other hand. Small, silver, impossible. 3 days later, Montgomery would drive me to a clinic in Cherry Creek where a DNA test would end 52 years of questions with one number, 99.97%. 3 days after Montgomery showed me that silver bracelet, a taxi pulled up to Lawrence Street Bridge to take a homeless man to the most expensive zip code in Denver. Day 26, 10 a.m. I'd washed my face and hands at the YMCA that morning using the last $2 I had tried to make myself presentable. It didn't work. I still smelled like a month outdoors. My clothes were stained, my beard uneven from a disposable razor. Montgomery stepped out of the taxi wearing another perfect suit. He didn't flinch when I approached. "I haven't showered in 4 days," I said. "They'll smell me from the waiting room." "They're professionals," Montgomery replied, opening the taxi door. "And I've paid enough that they won't care." The Cherry Creek DNA clinic was the first air-conditioned space I'd entered in a month. White lights, disinfectant, smell, clean surfaces that gleamed. The waiting room had leather chairs and magazines about health and wealth. I sat on the edge of one chair, afraid to touch too much. Sarah Monroe, the lab technician, called my name after 5 minutes. She was maybe 40, efficient professional. Drew my blood with practiced hands, labeled 3 vials, entered information into her computer. She'd seen enough desperate people seeking genetic answers to know better than to ask questions. Never commented on my appearance or the fact that I'd walked in smelling like concrete in November cold. "Results in 72 hours, she said. "Mr. Ashford has the contact information." That was it. 3 vials of blood in 72 hours until I learned whether I was who I'd always been or someone completely different. Afterward, Montgomery drove us to a small cafe 2 blocks away. Real cafe with tables and menus and waiters. He ordered for both of us soup, sandwich, hot coffee in actual ceramic cups, not styrofoam. The soup arrived steaming. I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten something hot at a table. "How is he, Alistair?" I asked. Montgomery's expression shifted. "He died 3 months ago." I'd known that. Montgomery had mentioned it. But hearing it again hit differently. "He spent 50 years looking for you," Montgomery continued quietly. "Hired investigators in 43 states. Spent millions on searches, DNA databases, age-progressed photos. He never gave up. He died not knowing if I was alive. He died believing you were," Montgomery said. "That belief kept him going. Every birthday he'd put a candle in the cupcake and make a wish. Every Christmas he'd buy a present and donate it in your name for 50 years. I stared at my soup. 3 months ago, right before he passed, I promised him I'd continue the search. He squeezed my hand and said, "Find my son." Those were his last words to me. I rode back to the bridge in Montgomery's sedan, knowing that in 72 hours a number on a page would either restore my name or confirm I was nobody, just as Gideon's blueprints could either vindicate him or remain locked in a briefcase forever. Days 26, 27, 28. I returned to normal routine. Didn't tell Gideon or Tessa about the DNA test. What would I say? That I might be heir to $200 million, but was still sleeping on cardboard. That a man spent 50 years searching for me while I taught Shakespeare to teenagers who didn't care. We ate day-old bread from the mission, drank dollar vending machine coffee from the gas station, slept under the bridge while November got colder. The second night of waiting, Gideon finally told me his story. We were sitting near the concrete pillar, small fire burning in a metal barrel. Tessa had gone to sleep. It was just us and the briefcase he never let go. "That bridge," he said, pointing vaguely north toward downtown. "The one on Spear Boulevard with the suspension cables. I designed that." I looked at him. "What?" 2008. I was working for Barrett Engineering. Designed the whole thing, load calculations, cable tension, foundation specs. My partner saw the plans, said they were brilliant. 2 weeks later, he fired me, claimed I was unstable. 3 months after that, the bridge broke ground using my exact design. My engineering, my calculations, no credit, no payment, my name nowhere. He tapped the briefcase. "I have the original blueprints in here. My signature, my calculations, every stress test, every formula. I've kept them locked up for 15 years because I was afraid they'd destroy them if they knew I had proof." Listening to Gideon's story, I finally understood what was in that briefcase, not money or drugs, but proof of existence, the only evidence that he was more than what the world saw. "Why didn't you sue?" I asked. "I tried. Couldn't afford a lawyer. The free legal aid said it wasn't worth their time, just my word against a corporation. They had lawyers, I had cardboard." He stared at the fire. 15 years I drive past that bridge. Every car that goes over it uses my engineering. I see it every day from down here, and my name's nowhere. Nobody knows I exist. I understood then. Gideon had his bridge stolen. I might have had my entire identity stolen. And we were both living under concrete because the thieves had lawyers, and we didn't. "If the DNA test comes back positive," I said slowly, "if I really am Prescott Blackthorne, I'll have money. Lawyers, power." Gideon looked at me. "What DNA test?" I told him everything. Montgomery, the bracelet, the kidnapping, the fortune. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "So you might wake up rich," he finally said. "I might wake up someone else," I corrected. "And if you do, if you get your name back, your money back, your power back, what happens to the rest of us?" The question hung in the cold air. "I don't know," I admitted. Gideon nodded slowly, clutched his briefcase tighter. "That's honest, at least." On the second night of waiting, I watched Gideon sleep with arms wrapped around that briefcase, and I thought, tomorrow the DNA results arrive. Tomorrow I might have proof that I'm Prescott Blackthorne. But proof of who you are and power to reclaim what was stolen, those I was learning, are two very different things. The next morning, day 4, after the test, Montgomery would return with an envelope containing one number that would rewrite 59 years of identity. The number on the page was 99.97%, and with those 6 characters, 59 years of my life became someone else's story. Day 29, 10 a.m., the same small cafe 2 blocks from the bridge where we'd eaten soup after the blood test. Montgomery sat across from me, a sealed envelope between us like a verdict. He opened it carefully, pulled out a single sheet of paper, slid it across the table. I stared at the number, 99.97% probability of genetic match to Alistair Blackthorne. "In genetic terms," Montgomery said quietly, "that's absolute certainty." My coffee went cold while I read. Birth name Prescott Blackthorne. Date of birth March 15th, 1963. Place of birth Denver General Hospital. Date of disappearance July 12th, 1970. Location Colorado State Fair. March 15th, 1963, I heard myself say. That's my birthday. Harold always made me cake on March 15th. "Because it was real," Montgomery said. "He just didn't know the rest was stolen." I read further. The adoption papers Harold had kept in his safety deposit box, the ones I'd found when he died, the ones that barely met legal standards, matched these dates almost perfectly. Almost. Harold had written my adoption date as April 1971, nearly 2 years after the kidnapping. 2 years of my life completely blank. Did Harold know? I asked. Did he know he'd adopted a kidnapped child? Montgomery shook his head. No evidence he knew. Probably took in a child without asking too many questions. That was more common 50 years ago. Adoption agencies were less regulated. Sometimes children came through channels that weren't entirely legal, but the adoptive parents were good people who just wanted to help. He was the best father I ever knew, I said quietly. I believe that, Montgomery replied, and I believe Alistair would have been grateful to him. Grateful that while Alistair searched, someone was loving you. I was born Prescott Blackthorne on March 15, 1963, and Harold Hale celebrated that birthday with me every year for 54 years, never knowing he was keeping alive the identity that had been stolen. Harold raised me for 54 years, I said. Alistair searched for 50. One kept me, one never stopped looking, and I'll never know either of them. Montgomery was quiet for a moment. Then, you knew one of them. That counts. We sat in that cafe for another hour while Montgomery explained next steps. Legal documentation, asset transfer, Blackthorne Family Council notification, words that sounded like a foreign language. Finally, he said, I have files you should see. Everything we've collected over 50 years. If you're ready. I wasn't ready, but I nodded anyway. 2 p.m., Montgomery's temporary office in a business hotel suite downtown. Files covered the entire desk, spilled onto chairs stacked on the floor. 50 years of searching compressed into cardboard boxes. Montgomery spread them across the conference table methodically. "This is the original 1970 Denver police report," he said, placing a yellowed document in front of me. There was a photo attached, a little boy, maybe 7 years old, smiling at a camera. My face. Younger, happier, unaware. "Witness statements from the state fair," Montgomery continued, adding more pages. "A woman saw a man carrying a crying child toward the parking lot. A security guard reported suspicious activity near the Ferris wheel. By the time police arrived, you were gone." He pulled out thicker files. "Private investigator reports spanning 5 decades. Alistair hired the best. They chased leads in 37 states. Every possible sighting, every rumor, every anonymous tip. Nothing conclusive until 3 months ago when we finally connected Harold Hale's adoption records to the timeline." "Who took me?" I asked. Montgomery's expression darkened. "We believe it was orchestrated by Cornelius Blackthorne, Alistair's half-brother. Cornelius was written out of the family will because of gambling debts and business failures. When you were born, you became the legitimate heir. Cornelius saw you as an obstacle. He hired someone to kidnap me," I said slowly, "to eliminate me from the inheritance." "Yes, the men who actually took you were never identified. Cornelius died in 2018 in Florida. Never charged, never confessed. But our family investigation in 2015 found financial transfers that connected him to known criminals operating in Colorado in 1970. My uncle hired men to kidnap me. His son inherited the profits, and I slept under a bridge. Cornelius is dead," Montgomery continued, "but his son Edmund Blackthorne is very much alive. And Edmund currently holds $28 million in Blackthorne assets through a Delaware shell company, money that legally belongs to you by inheritance law and blood." I stared at him. $28 million. "Edmund has been operating under the assumption that you were dead and the estate would eventually default to extended family. He's been systematically moving assets offshore for 6 years. We have documentation. We can sue and win. But that's your decision to make." Montgomery pulled out one final document. "This is the complete accounting of Alistair's estate. $200 million in total assets. 62% voting shares in Blackthorne Holdings, which operates commercial real estate development across 7 states. It's yours. All of it. The question is, what do you want to do with it?" 4 weeks ago, I was thrown out of my house. Today, I'm the heir to $200 million, and I still don't have a jacket. I looked at the files spread across the table. Police reports, witness statements, financial records, 50 years of evidence that I'd been stolen, hidden, erased from my own life. "I don't know what I want," I admitted. Montgomery nodded. "That's honest, and that's okay. But the Blackthorne Family Council will want to meet you. They'll need to verify you're capable of managing the estate. Some of them won't believe a homeless man is really the heir. Some will want DNA tests of their own. This won't be easy." "Nothing about this has been easy," I said. I sat in that hotel room surrounded by 50 years of evidence, police reports, private investigators, witnesses who remembered a 7-year-old boy vanishing from a Ferris wheel. And Montgomery asked what I wanted to do with $200 million. I had no answer. A month ago, I'd wanted my house back. Now I could buy 100 houses. But I still didn't know who I was. The next week would teach me that money without identity is just numbers, and identity without acceptance is just a story no one believes. 1 week after DNA confirmed I was heir to $200 million, I walked into Blackthorne Holdings wearing clothes that still smelled like Lawrence Street Bridge, and the family council looked at me like I'd tracked mud into a cathedral. Day 36, 28th floor conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Denver and the Rocky Mountains beyond. 5 family council members sat in leather chairs around a mahogany table that probably cost more than my annual teaching salary. Montgomery stood beside me in his perfect suit. I stood in clothes I'd slept in on cardboard. The oldest council member, gray-haired, expensive watch expression like he'd bitten something sour, spoke first. "Mr. Hale," he said, "not Blackthorn, or whatever we're calling you. DNA proves biology, not capability. We need assurance you can handle fiduciary responsibility for $200 million in assets." "I understand," I said. "Do you—" Another member leaned forward. "You came from sleeping under a bridge. No disrespect intended, but how are we supposed to trust you're capable of running a corporation?" The room went quiet. They waited for me to defend myself, to apologize, to prove I wasn't what I looked like. I didn't. "Alistair Blackthorn searched for his son for 50 years, I said quietly. "He wasn't looking for a good administrator. He was looking for me. I respect this council's need for due diligence, but I won't apologize for surviving homelessness." One of the women, younger, sharper, actually smiled slightly. The others shifted in their chairs. "We propose independent investigation," the oldest member said. "Background check, character assessment, financial competency evaluation, standard procedure for anyone assuming control of significant assets." "How long?" I asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Montgomery spoke up. "I recommend Serafina Vale, best private investigator in Colorado. She's thorough, ethical, and will give you an honest assessment." The council voted unanimously. Serafina Vale would investigate whether the homeless man was fit to be an heir. They looked at me and saw incompetence. I looked at them and saw people who'd never had to choose between dignity and survival, never had to learn what truly matters when everything else is stripped away. I left that conference room the same way I'd entered it, wearing bridge clothes, smelling like November cold DNA, confirmed heir to a fortune, but still sleeping on cardboard. 3 days later, day 39, I sat in Serafina Vale's office in Capitol Hill. The office was small, cluttered with filing cabinets and computers. Serafina Vale was 44, professional investigator in a no-nonsense business suit, dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She sat across from me, reviewing documents Montgomery had provided. "Teaching resume," she said, placing papers on the desk. "Jefferson High School, 1993 to 2023, 30 years. I nodded. She flipped through pages. Student testimonials, performance reviews, a list of students I'd sponsored for books and tutoring over 3 decades. She stopped, looked at the page, looked up at me. "I went to Jefferson," she said slowly. 10th grade, fall 1993. My stomach tightened. "I was about to drop out," she continued. Her professional detachment was cracking. "My father lost his job at the factory. We couldn't afford books. I couldn't pay the chemistry textbook rental fee." I stared at her, memory stirring. "A teacher found me crying in the hallway," Serafina said. Her voice softened. "Bought me textbooks from his own money. Tutored me 3 afternoons a week for 3 months. Free." She looked directly at me. "That was you." Her maiden name was Collins. And I remembered the torn backpack, the chemistry book, the hallway outside room 217. The girl had been sitting on the floor, rental notice crumpled in her hand, face red from crying. 15 years old and already deciding her future was over. I'd sat down beside her, asked what was wrong. She'd shown me the notice, $60 for a chemistry textbook she couldn't return. Her father had been laid off. They were behind on rent. She couldn't ask her parents for $60 they didn't have. I'd driven to the bookstore that afternoon, bought the textbook new, brought it to her the next morning. No forms, no paperwork, no need to pay me back. "You said I was smart enough for college," Serafina whispered. "Nobody had ever said that before. Not my teachers, not my parents, not anyone." I remembered that too. Sitting in my classroom after school, helping her with chemistry homework, watching her solve problems she'd thought were impossible. "You were smart enough," I said. "You just needed someone to believe it." "I went to college," Serafina said. "Criminal justice degree. Became a police officer, then moved to private investigation. I'm good at what I do. I'm good because you made me believe I could be." She closed the file on her desk. "This council hired me to investigate whether you're fit to inherit $200 million. They want to know if you're trustworthy, capable, deserving." She met my eyes. I was 15 years old, sitting on a hallway floor, ready to give up. "You gave me textbooks. You gave me your time. You gave me a future. You didn't ask for anything back. You didn't put your name on a plaque. You just helped because someone needed help." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'll conduct this investigation, and I'll make them understand that the man who gave me a future when I had nothing deserves his own. I'll do everything I can to make sure they see what I see, not the homeless clothes or the bridge smell, but the person who's been helping people for 30 years, whether anyone was watching or not." Serafina Vale closed my file and looked at me with eyes that had cried in a high school hallway 29 years ago. "I'll conduct this investigation," she said quietly, "and I'll make them understand that the man who gave me a future when I had nothing deserves his own." For the first time since Montgomery found me under that bridge, I thought maybe I have a chance. 2 weeks later, Serafina would stand before that same council and present evidence that would silence every doubt, but first I had to survive long enough to see it. 2 weeks after Serafina promised to help, I sat in that 28th floor conference room while she stood before 5 skeptical council members and systematically dismantled every doubt they'd ever had about the homeless man claiming to be their heir. Day 43, the same leather chairs, the same mahogany table, the same floor-to-ceiling windows. But this time I'd showered at the YMCA that morning. This time Montgomery had loaned me a clean shirt. Small dignities that changed nothing about who I was, but everything about how they looked at me. Serafina stood at the head of the table in her business suit, laptop, open printed reports stacked beside her. Professional, thorough, unemotional. "Background investigation complete," she began. "Subject Prescott Hale, also known as Prescott Blackthorne, age 59, no criminal record, no civil litigation, no financial scandals, no complaints filed with any educational board during 30 years of employment at Jefferson High School." She clicked through slides, documentation, evidence, facts. Documented assistance to underprivileged students, 287 cases over 3 decades. Books purchased from personal funds. Tutoring provided free of charge. Meals provided when students arrived hungry. Not $1 requested in return. Not one instance of seeking recognition or credit. The council members watched silently. Financial history: lived within means, paid bills on time, saved modest retirement fund until forced eviction 7 weeks ago. No debt beyond standard mortgage, which was signed over through fraud by his son. Character references from 30 years of colleagues universally positive. Assessment subject demonstrates consistent pattern of ethical behavior, personal sacrifice for others' benefit, and financial responsibility. Serafina paused, set down her report. "I'm evidence number 83 on that list," she said. The room went completely still. Fall 1993, 10th grade. My father had just lost his job at the factory. We couldn't afford textbooks. I was sitting in a hallway outside room 217 with a rental notice, deciding whether to drop out. She looked directly at me. This man bought my chemistry textbook from his own salary, tutored me 3 afternoons a week for 3 months, asked nothing in return. Because of him, I graduated. Because of him, I went to college. Because of him, I have the career that allowed me to conduct this investigation. The oldest council member, the one who'd questioned my capability, shifted in his chair. "You're asking if he's worthy of his own inheritance," Serafina continued. "I'm telling you he's been giving away what little he had for 30 years while asking for nothing back. The question isn't whether he deserves the money. The question is whether the money deserves him." She sat down. The file Montgomery handed me said Prescott Blackthorne, sole heir. but I was still the same man who'd given his jacket away 3 weeks ago, still the same teacher who'd helped Serafina in 1993, still the same son who'd never gotten his house back. The council voted. 7 in favor, 1 abstention. Montgomery slid the official file across the table. "Welcome home, Prescott Blackthorne," he said quietly. "Your father would be proud." I held that file and felt nothing like pride, just weight, responsibility. The knowledge that $200 million had suddenly become mine to use or waste or give away or hide. What I did next would define whether I was worthy of what Serafina had said about me. That afternoon, Montgomery drove me to the Ritz-Carlton. "The presidential suite is yours," he said. "The council wants you to look the part before the public announcement." The suite had 3 bedrooms, a living room larger than my old house, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, but what I remember most was the shower. 6 weeks. That's how long it had been since I'd had hot water that didn't shut off after 5 minutes, since I'd had water pressure that felt like actual rain instead of a trickle, since I'd had soap that lathered and heat that soaked into bones that had forgotten what warmth felt like. I stood under that shower until the water ran cold. Then I stood under cold water until I couldn't feel my skin anymore. Because the hot water washed away 6 weeks of dirt, but couldn't wash away 6 weeks of truth. I'd learned who people really are when money and status disappear, and I wouldn't unlearn it just because mine had returned. Afterward, Brooks Brothers. Montgomery had called ahead. They were ready. 4 tailors, 2 salespeople, racks of suits in every shade of gray and black and navy. "Charcoal," I said, pointing to one. "Simple." They measured, pinned, adjusted. $4,000 for 1 suit. Italian leather shoes that cost more than a month's teaching salary. Silk ties in colors I didn't have names for. The watch I chose myself. Patek Philippe, the salesman said. Silver understated, elegant. Not the gold too flashy. Not the platinum too cold. Silver like the watch Harold had given me, like the bracelet Montgomery had shown me, like the thread connecting my life before and after. "My foster father wore silver," I told Montgomery. "The Patek Philippe," the sales associate said, nodding approvingly. "Excellent choice, sir. Understated wealth." Wealth. The word still felt foreign. They led me to a dressing room mirror, full-length, perfect lighting. The man looking back was a stranger, clean, expensive, powerful. Hair cut by someone who knew what they were doing. Suit that fit like it was grown on my body. Shoes that gleamed. But my hands. I looked at my hands in that mirror. 30 years of teaching had left calluses where chalk dust ground into skin. My fingernails still had embedded dirt that one shower, even a presidential suite shower, couldn't completely remove. These hands had graded papers and built cardboard rockets and held a dying veteran while Gideon did CPR. This suit costs more than I earned in a month of teaching. But these hands, these calluses, they're proof I was real before the money. "You look like a Blackthorne," Montgomery said. I looked like someone playing dress-up in someone else's life. I stood in that Brooks Brothers dressing room wearing a $4,000 suit, looking at hands that still had chalk embedded under the nails and calluses from 30 years of teaching. Montgomery was waiting to take me to a 5-star dinner, but I was thinking about Gideon sleeping with his briefcase tonight, about Tessa handing out bread she couldn't afford to share, about Jacob recovering in a hospital because I'd given away my only jacket. The council had given me $200 million. I still hadn't decided what it was for. What I didn't know was that while I'd been living under a bridge, my son had been living in my house and he was about to lose it. While I was being recognized as Prescott Blackthorne heir to $200 million, my son was opening an email that would destroy the life he'd built on my stolen house. I didn't know this at the time. Didn't know that on day 43, the same afternoon, Montgomery handed me that file saying, "Welcome home." Riker was sitting at the kitchen table of 2847 Oakwood Drive, staring at his laptop screen. Final notice. The email read, "Employment officially terminated March 15th, 2022. Final severance payment deposited. All benefits, including health insurance, expired as of yesterday, March 15th, 3 months ago, 1 week before he'd evicted me. Vivian walked into the kitchen carrying groceries. "What's wrong?" she asked, seeing his face. Riker closed the laptop. "Nothing." But Vivian was a lawyer, or had been before her practice failed. She knew when someone was hiding something. "What severance?" she said slowly. "You said you were working from home." Riker had been unemployed for 12 weeks. Every morning he'd left the house with his laptop, told Vivian he was working remotely from coffee shops. Every day he'd sent resumes, filled out applications, interviewed with companies that never called back. Every evening he'd come home and pretended he'd had a productive day. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When?" Vivian's voice was cold. "When they foreclosed." She walked to the recycling bin, pulled out envelopes Riker thought he'd hidden well enough. Bank statements, 7 different return addresses. She opened them methodically, one after another, while Riker sat frozen. $420,000, she said finally. 7 credit cards, 2 auto loans, 1 home equity line. You've been lying about everything, the job, the debt, all of it. Riker had been unemployed for 12 weeks. He'd evicted his father in week 1. The argument that followed was explosive. Riker blamed Vivian's failed law practice, the investment in office space that never paid off the clients who never materialized the loans she'd taken to keep appearances. Vivian blamed Riker for lying about employment, for hiding debt, for making decisions that affected both of them without telling her. Mid-fight, Vivian stopped, walked to the living room window, looked out at the front yard, the driveway, the house they'd taken from me.
"This house is worth $500,000, she said. Her voice was flat, calculating. "Market value may be more. We sell it, clear the debt, start over somewhere cheaper."
Riker knew she was right. Knew they had no alternative. The house was their only asset, worth more than they owed. "Fine," he said, "sell it." Neither of them mentioned me. Neither of them wondered where I'd gone, whether I'd survived, whether I was still alive. 1 week later, day 50. Vivian walked into Dorian Lockwood's real estate office in Cherry Creek. Dorian Lockwood was 48, one of Denver's top agents for 25 years. He'd built his career on knowing the market, understanding people, remembering details others forgot. Vivian handed him the file. "I need to sell quickly. We have time-sensitive financial obligations." Dorian opened the file. Standard sale, single-family home, Park Hill neighborhood, well-maintained. Then he saw the address. 2847 Oakwood Drive. He stared at it for 5 seconds too long. $500,000 asking price, he said, keeping his voice controlled. Standard 6% commission. When do you need to close? As fast as possible, Vivian said. Dorian had spent 25 years in Denver real estate, driving past that address, and he'd never forgotten the man who'd saved his education in that living room. Now someone named Hale was selling it as if they owned what wasn't theirs. He remembered 1993 like it was yesterday. 17 years old, sitting on the couch in that living room, crying because his father had just declared bankruptcy. Dorian was dropping out of high school the next day to work full-time, help pay bills, keep the family from losing everything. Then a knock on the door. A young teacher from Jefferson High School whom Dorian had never met, didn't know, had no connection to, except that his counselor must have mentioned the situation. The teacher stood on the porch carrying textbooks. "Your counselor told me," the teacher said. "These are yours. You don't need to repay me, just study hard." Dorian had tried to refuse. "I don't even know your name." "Doesn't matter," the teacher replied. "What matters is you graduate." Dorian had graduated, had gone to college on scholarships, had built a successful career, had spent 25 years wanting to repay a debt to a man whose name he'd never learned. Now that address, that exact living room where the teacher had stood, was on his desk, and Vivian Hale was selling it. Dorian finished the paperwork. Vivian signed. The moment she left, he pulled out his phone. 2 weeks ago, Montgomery Ashford had called, asking about real estate contacts. The Prescott Blackthorne story was spreading through Denver's professional circles. The kidnapped heir, the homeless man, the DNA test, the fortune. Montgomery had mentioned Blackthorne used to be a teacher, used to live in Park Hill.
Dorian dialed.
Montgomery, it's Dorian Lockwood. Remember you called about Prescott Blackthorne? I think you need to know something about his old address.
I didn't know any of this yet.
Didn't know my son was selling my house. Didn't know Dorian Lockwood remembered me. Didn't know Montgomery was about to call with news that would turn my inheritance into a weapon.
I was still deciding what to do with $200 million.
Karma apparently was already deciding for me. 2 days later, Montgomery would walk into my Ritz-Carlton suite with news that my old house was for sale and ask if I wanted to buy it back. 2 days after karma started deciding for me, Montgomery called with news that would turn my inheritance into a weapon. Your old house, he said without preamble. 2847 Ashwood Lane. It's for sale. I was standing in the Ritz-Carlton suite looking out at Denver wearing the charcoal suit that cost more than a month's teaching salary. The view showed mountains I'd seen my whole life from a different angle.
How much? I asked.
500,000, listed yesterday through Dorian Lockwood Real Estate.
Dorian Lockwood.
The name was familiar, but I couldn't place it. Montgomery continued. Your son and his wife are the sellers. They need to close quickly. The listing agent mentioned time-sensitive financial obligations.
My son, selling my house.
The house I'd bought 31 years ago raised him in loss to his signature on fraudulent papers.
I want to buy it, I said.
Montgomery was quiet for a moment. Are you sure it's just a house? You could buy 10 houses.
How much am I offering?
What do you mean, how much are you? $1 million, I said. Cash, anonymous shell company. I want my son to sign every document before he knows who the buyer is.
That's double market value,
Montgomery said carefully. You'd be overpaying by,
I know exactly what I'm doing.
Double the asking price eliminates competition, forces a fast close, and most importantly ensures he signs everything before discovering the buyer's identity.
Montgomery exhaled slowly.
You want him to know afterward.
I want him to realize exactly what he did. I'll set up the shell company.
Heir Property Holdings LLC, your name, but buried behind corporate layers. It'll take a few days to structure properly. As Montgomery read the listing details over the phone, I closed my eyes and saw at the red front door I'd painted the summer Riker turned 12, the cracked driveway where he'd learned to ride a bike, the kitchen window where I'd watched for his headlights when he stayed out late. I'd bought that house 31 years ago for $87,000, every mortgage payment made on a teacher's salary. Now it was worth $500,000 and my son was selling it like it had never meant anything. The memory lasted 3 seconds. Then it was gone, replaced by cold arithmetic. $1 million buys silence, buys speed, buys control.
Do it, I said.
I'll have the offer submitted by tomorrow morning, Montgomery replied. At that price, they'll accept within hours. Before I reveal what I did next, the decision that would define everything that follows, are you still with me? Comment. A, if you think this is justice. B, if it's revenge. And tell me one reason why in your own words. Please note what follows includes dramatized details added for narrative impact and emotional depth. The lesson behind it is what matters most. There was a pause on the line. Then I asked the question that had been forming since Montgomery first called. What about his debt?
Excuse me,
my son's debt. You said they have time-sensitive financial obligations. How much does he owe? Montgomery was quiet. When he spoke again, his voice was different. The Blackthorne legal team did a preliminary background check when we were investigating you. Your son has approximately $320,000 in outstanding debt. Credit cards, auto loans, home equity line. 7 different creditors.
Buy it, I said.
Buy the debt. All of it. Through the same shell company that's buying the house. I want every dollar of my son's debt transferred to Heir Property Holdings LLC.
Prescott.
Montgomery's voice dropped. That's aggressive. Some might say vindictive. I paused. Is this revenge or justice, cruelty or consequence? I thought about the night Riker evicted me, the way Vivian had smiled when she said I had 2 hours. I thought about sleeping in my car, eating day-old bread under a bridge, saving a veteran's life because I had nothing left to lose. My son had made me invisible. Now I was going to make him see exactly what he'd done, not by telling him, but by owning him. My son made me homeless, I said quietly. Now I'll own his debts, his house sale, his future, and he won't know until I decide to tell him. Buy the debt. Montgomery didn't argue. Over the next 3 hours, he coordinated with the Blackthorn legal team. Wire transfers, creditor negotiations, debt purchase agreements with 3 banks and 2 private lenders. The numbers were large enough that creditors asked questions, but cash answers all questions eventually. By evening, Montgomery called back. "It's done," he said. "Heir Property Holdings, LLC, now owns $320,000 of your son's debt. He'll receive creditor transfer notices within a week, but the corporate structure keeps your identity hidden. As far as he knows, his debt was sold to a random investment company." I stood at the window looking at Denver lights spreading across the valley. Somewhere out there, my son was sitting in my house, believing he was selling it to an anonymous buyer, believing his debt belonged to strangers. He had no idea he'd signed his future over to the man he'd made homeless. "There's one more thing," Montgomery said. "Dorian Lockwood requested a meeting with the buyer before closing. He says he has questions about the all-cash offer." My blood went cold. "What kind of questions?" He didn't specify. Just said something feels familiar about this transaction and he'd like to speak with the buyer directly. I told him you prefer anonymity, but he's insisting. Dorian Lockwood. The name tugged at memory but wouldn't surface. "If he digs too deep," I said slowly, "if he discovers I'm the buyer before Riker signs, the entire plan collapses," Montgomery finished. "I know. I'll handle it carefully." He hung up. I stood at the window thinking about the house I'd just bought back for twice its value, about the debt I now owned, about the son who'd evicted me and had no idea his father controlled everything. Dorian Lockwood wanted a meeting. Something felt familiar to him. If he recognized me before Riker signed, 8 weeks of careful strategy would be destroyed. Montgomery called back 2 hours later. Dorian Lockwood accepted the anonymity clause and the deal moved forward. "He asked questions," Montgomery said. "Said he had personal reasons for wanting transparency, but when I explained the buyer valued privacy and offered to walk away if that was a problem, he backed down, said he'd handle the transaction professionally." I exhaled slowly. The plan was intact. "Documents go to your son and his wife tomorrow," Montgomery continued. "They'll have a week to review and sign. Closing is scheduled for next Friday at 2 p.m. 1 week. 7 days until I walked into a room and faced the son who'd made me homeless. "Keep me updated," I said. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't know until Montgomery told me later, was what happened when those documents arrived. 1 week before the scheduled closing, Vivian Hale sat at the kitchen table of 2847 Oakwood Drive with a sealed envelope from Dorian Lockwood Real Estate. She opened it, slowly pulled out the purchase agreement, and her eyes went straight to the offer price. $1 million. She stared at it for 5 full seconds. "Riker," she called. "Come here." My son walked into the kitchen. He'd been unemployed for 4 months now. The house they were selling was the only thing standing between them and financial collapse. "Look at this," Vivian said, sliding the document across the table. Riker read the number. That's double what we asked." "Double what we expected," Vivian corrected. "The buyer paid double without bargaining. This is a miracle. Don't ask too many questions. Don't delay." Riker picked up the document stack. 20 pages. Purchase agreement, title transfer, closing terms. He started reading carefully. "What are you doing?" Vivian asked. "Reading it, making sure—" "Our lawyer already reviewed it," Vivian interrupted. "Everything's standard. The buyer wants to close fast. We should sign tonight and get it back to them." Riker kept reading. Flipped to page 7, subsection 3. Something about debt acknowledgement and creditor transfer. "What's this clause about?" "Riker." Vivian's voice sharpened. "The buyer paid $1 million. Cash. No inspection contingency. no financing. This is the deal that saves us. Don't we know anything about the buyer?
What good is knowing, Vivian said. Their money is real. That's all that matters.
Riker looked at his wife, at the documents, at the $1 million number that would clear their debt and give them a fresh start. He signed every page, including page 7, subsection 3, which acknowledged the transfer of $320,000 in debt to Heir Property Holdings, LLC. He had no idea what he'd just agreed to. What I didn't know yet, what I wouldn't know until Montgomery told me later, was that my son tried to read those documents carefully, tried to protect himself, and his wife stopped him. Thursday night, one day before the signing, I couldn't sleep. The Ritz-Carlton presidential suite had every luxury imaginable, but I lay awake staring at the ceiling thinking about tomorrow. Not nervous, not scared, just imagining my son's face when he learned the truth. I'd been planning this for 2 weeks. The anonymous purchase, the debt acquisition, the perfect trap. But something was missing. I thought about the last time I'd seen Riker before the eviction, 3 years ago. Thanksgiving dinner at my house, the house I'd already lost without knowing it. He'd spent the entire meal on his phone. Vivian had made comments about my cooking. I'd served turkey and tried to make conversation while my son checked emails and his wife picked at her food. That was the last normal day. Before he signed the papers. Before I became homeless. Before everything changed. 2 a.m. I picked up my phone and called Montgomery. "It's late," he said, answering on the first ring. "Lawyers never sleep." "Celine," I said, "can't she come tomorrow?" Silence. "You want your ex-wife at the signing?" "I want my son to hear the truth from his mother's mouth. Not from me. Never from me." "How do you tell your son he was kidnapped? That the man who raised him stole him from a fortune? That his whole life is a lie?" "You don't. You let his mother explain it." "Celine left me 30 years ago," I said quietly. "She told our son I'd driven her away. She let him believe that lie for decades while I stayed silent to protect her. Tomorrow he's going to learn I'm the heir to $200 million. He's going to learn he was kidnapped as a child. He's going to learn his entire understanding of his family is fiction." I looked out at the Denver skyline, at the city lights blurring through the window. "He needs to hear it from her," I continued. "Needs to understand that I stayed silent not because I was guilty, but because I chose his relationship with his mother over my own reputation. Needs to know the truth came from the person who created the lie." Montgomery was quiet for a long moment. "Are you sure about this? Bringing Celine means she'll have to face what she did, what she didn't do for 30 years. She'll have to admit she lied. That's not easy." "She stayed silent while I slept in my car," I said. "She can speak now." Another pause. "I'll contact her tonight," Montgomery said finally. "If she agrees, I'll have her at the signing tomorrow. 2 p.m., 28th floor. Thank you, Prescott." His voice softened. "Tomorrow is going to be brutal. For everyone. Are you ready for that?" I thought about 8 weeks sleeping under a bridge. About giving my jacket away in -8-degree cold. About learning my entire identity was stolen from me as a child. About watching my son sign away my house while I had nothing. "I've been ready since the night he evicted me," I said. I hung up and sat in the darkness of the presidential suite surrounded by luxury. I'd never wanted holding power. I'd never asked for planning a confrontation that would destroy whatever remained of my relationship with my son. Tomorrow Celine would walk into that conference room. Tomorrow Riker would learn that everything he believed about his parents was wrong. Tomorrow the house he'd stolen would become mine again, along with every dollar of debt he owed. Tomorrow my son would understand exactly what he'd done. Montgomery's voice went quiet on the other end of the line. "Are you sure about this? Bringing Celine means she'll have to face what she did, what she didn't do for 30 years. I looked out at the Denver skyline, at the city lights blurring through the window. She stayed silent while I slept in my car. She can speak now. The signing will bring together everyone who shaped Riker's lies. Friday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that makes you believe the universe has been listening. I stood at the window of the Blackthorn conference room on the 14th floor watching Denver wake up below me and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: certainty. Montgomery arrived at 10 o'clock, sharp leather portfolio under his arm, followed by Serafina in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my Honda's funeral. Dorian Lockwood came last, clutching a manila folder thick with documents. 2 hours until they arrive, Montgomery said, spreading papers across the mahogany table. Let's review everything one final time. He walked me through the stack deed transfer on pages 3 through 5, mortgage assumption on page 6, and there buried in the fine print of page 7, subsection 3, debt assumption clause. $420,000 of Riker's gambling debts, casino markers, and loan shark IOUs, all legally transferring to him the moment he signed. He won't read this far, Dorian said quietly. His mother won't let him. She thinks they're making $800,000 on a house they bought for $320. Serafina checked her phone. Celine's flight lands at 12:40. She confirmed she'll be here by 1:30. She looked at me, gray eyes unreadable. Are you certain about bringing her into this? I thought about Celine's silence when Riker evicted me. The way she'd known about Harold and Adelaide Hale my entire childhood, known I wasn't theirs. Known the Blackthorns had spent 50 years searching and said nothing. 30 years of phone calls where she could have told me the truth. She needs to be here, I said. Montgomery poured coffee from a silver carafe. Once Riker signs these documents, the debt transfers immediately. The house closes in 3 weeks. He'll own a property with a mortgage he can't afford, and creditors who will come calling within days. And you'll own his debt, Serafina added, which means you control exactly how much pressure he feels. I picked up the Patek Philippe on my wrist, $67,000 of Swiss precision that had replaced Harold's Timex. Everything had changed so fast. 6 weeks ago, I was sleeping in my Honda with $28 and a broken heater. Now I was orchestrating financial revenge from a conference room that probably cost more to furnish than most people's houses. What if he asks questions? I said. Dorian shook his head. Vivian won't let him. I've worked with her type before she sees dollar signs and stops thinking. She'll rush him through the signing before he can read anything carefully. They spent the next hour preparing like generals before battle. Montgomery reviewed contingencies. Serafina set up the signing area with pens that cost more than my weekly grocery budget used to. Dorian arranged the documents in precise order tabs, marking every signature line. At 1:15, Serafina's phone buzzed. Celine's in the lobby. My stomach tightened. I hadn't seen my ex-wife in 4 years, not since Riker's 26th birthday dinner, where she'd brought her new husband and I'd brought a bottle of wine I couldn't afford. She stepped off the elevator at 1:20 and I barely recognized her. The Celine I'd married at 23 had been all wild curls and thrift store dresses. This woman wore cream slacks and a silk blouse, hair professionally styled, diamond studs in her ears. Prescott, she said quietly. We didn't hug. Montgomery offered her coffee. She declined. We sat in uncomfortable silence while Dorian checked his watch every 30 seconds. At 1:50, Serafina glanced toward the door. They're early. I heard them before I saw them. Vivian's laugh echoing down the hallway, sharp and delighted. Then Riker's voice lower, saying something about finally getting what we deserve. Montgomery caught my eye, nodded once, and I slipped through the side door into the adjacent observation room. Through the one-way glass, I watched my son enter the conference room. Riker wore a suit I'd never seen, navy blue, probably purchased for this occasion, still creased from the store. Vivian had dressed like she was attending a gala, red dress and heels that clicked against the floor. They were both beaming. Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, Dorian said smoothly, playing his role perfectly. Please have a seat. We'll have you out of here in 20 minutes. 20 minutes to $800,000, Vivian said, squeezing Riker's shoulder. I told you that house would pay off. Montgomery guided them through the documents with practiced precision. Initial here, here, and here. Sign at the bottom of page 3. Flip to page 5. His voice was hypnotic, bureaucratic, designed to make them stop thinking and just sign. I watched Riker's hand move across the pages. Each signature felt like a small earthquake. Page 3, page 5, page 6. He hesitated at page 7 and my heart stopped. Vivian leaned in. Don't overthink it, honey. Just sign. His pen touched paper. 1 signature, 2, 3. It was done. Dorian gathered the documents with theatrical efficiency. Congratulations, the house closes in 3 weeks. You'll receive the funds within 48 hours of closing. Vivian actually clapped soft, delicate applause that echoed in the conference room's perfect acoustics. We did it, Riker. We actually did it. What they'd actually done was sign away their future to the homeless father they'd discarded. They'd transferred $420,000 in debt to themselves. They'd sold the only asset they had to a buyer who'd been sleeping in his car 2 months ago. I stood up, my reflection sharp in the one-way glass. This was it. The moment I'd been building toward since Montgomery first said the words $200 million. Montgomery's voice came through my earpiece, quiet and clear. Once you open that door, there's no going back. They'll know everything. Celine will have to face what she's hidden. Riker will have to confront what he's done. Are you ready? Through the glass, I watched my son laugh with his mother, both of them convinced they'd just won the lottery. I reached for the door handle anyway. I opened the door. The conference room fell silent. Montgomery stood smooth and professional, placing one hand on the back of his chair. According to the agreement, allow me to introduce the buyer. I stepped inside. Riker's head snapped up. For 1 perfect second, his face was pure joy, the kind of expression I'd seen when he was 8 and hit his first baseball over the fence. Then recognition hit, and the joy drained away like water through a sieve. Dad! His voice broke on the word. Not angry yet, just shocked, confused, as if reality had twisted into something he couldn't parse. Vivian jumped to her feet, chair scraping against polished wood. Her hands trembled as she pointed at me. This transaction is invalid. I don't know what game you're playing, Prescott, but Montgomery's voice cut through hers like a scalpel. All terms were signed by Mr. Riker Hale after being fully read and interpreted. The transaction is completely legal under Colorado law. Dorian remained seated at the far end of the table, the notary beside him nodding confirmation. The documents lay spread across the mahogany surface, every page signed, every initial in place, including the debt assumption clause on page 7, subsection 3. I walked to the head of the table, feeling the weight of the Patek Philippe on my wrist. The perfectly tailored suit Serafina had chosen, the $67,000 watch that had replaced Harold's $15 Timex. Riker stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. I don't understand, he said quietly. You were living in your car. You had nothing. I had $47, I said. When you evicted me, that's what I had left after buying gas. Vivian's face flushed red. You can't afford this house. Where did you get $1 million, I said. Cash. That's what I paid. The papers are signed. Riker's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked like a fish drowning in air. Where did you get the money, Dad? You're living in a car, you are... He stopped mid-sentence. I watched the realization hit him that he knew nothing about me. Nothing real. He knew Harold Hale's son, the furniture store manager who couldn't hold a job, the father who disappointed him. But he didn't know who I actually was. Montgomery placed a thick file on the table. The blackthorn crest embossed on the cover caught the afternoon light. Mr. Riker Hale, Montgomery said, his voice formal now, the kind of tone used for official pronouncements. I officially announce the buyer is Prescott Blackthorn, long-lost biological son of the late patriarch Alistair Blackthorn, sole legitimate heir to Blackthorn Holdings, with total assets exceeding $200 million and 62% group voting rights. The words hung in the air like smoke. Riker sank into his chair as if his legs had stopped working. His face went pale. You're not... My name is Prescott Hale because Harold and Adelaide Hale adopted me in 1967, I said. But I was born Prescott Blackthorne, kidnapped as an infant. Your grandfather Harold, he knew. They both knew. And they never told me. My son's face, I'll remember it forever. The way shock turned to disbelief, then to something harder to name. Not anger yet. Something closer to betrayal, as if I'd violated the natural order by refusing to stay broken. Vivian's eyes darted from me to Montgomery to the signed documents. I could see her mind working, calculating, trying to find the angle that would let her charm or manipulate her way out of this. 200 million, Riker whispered. Give or take, Montgomery said. The full portfolio includes real estate holdings, investment accounts, and controlling shares in 7 subsidiary companies. The Blackthorne family spent 50 years searching for their missing heir. DNA testing confirmed the match 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, I was sleeping in my Honda with $28 and a broken heater. 6 weeks ago, I thought my life was over. Dorian gathered the signed documents into a neat stack. The house closes in 3 weeks. All terms remain as agreed. Terms, Riker repeated like he was learning a foreign language. 10 weeks ago, I had $47 in my wallet and slept in my Honda. Now I owned my son's house, his debt, and his future. Yes, terms, I said, including the debt assumption clause you signed on page 7, subsection 3. Riker's face went blank. What debt? Vivian's hand shot out, gripping his arm. Don't say anything. But Montgomery was already opening another folder. $420,000 in consolidated debt. Casino markers from 3 different establishments. Loan shark agreements. Private lending contracts. All transferred to Mr. Riker Hale upon signing. You said, Riker turned to his mother, his voice rising. You said we were making $800,000. You said, we are, Vivian said quickly. We're selling for $1 million. We paid $320. That's minus the $420 in debt you just assumed, Montgomery said, which means you now owe more than the house is worth. The math hit Riker like a physical blow. I watched him work through it. $1 million in proceeds, $320 in original purchase, $420 in new debt. They'd be underwater by $440,000 after 3 weeks. But who? Riker's voice died. He looked at me. Really looked at me. Who owns the debt? Montgomery closed the folder. The debt was purchased by a private investor 2 weeks ago. The terms include monthly interest at 7.5% with full principal due in 90 days. Who owns it? Riker repeated. Vivian's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes locked on mine, and I saw the exact moment she understood. The calculations racing across her face stopped. Her hand released Riker's arm and fell to her side. She was looking at a man worth $200 million who'd been sleeping in his car 10 weeks ago. A man who'd just paid $1 million cash for a $320,000 house. A man who had no reason to do any of this. Unless, she whispered, you bought the debt. I didn't answer, didn't need to. Montgomery confirmed it anyway. The debt holder is Prescott Blackthorne, acting through Blackthorne Holdings Investment Division. Vivian stood frozen, and I could see her trying to salvage this, trying to find the words that would charm or manipulate her way out. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted from me to Montgomery to the signed documents on the table. She was calculating, I could see it, calculating how to salvage this, how to charm or manipulate her way out. Then the conference room door opened again and my ex-wife Celine walked in. My son looked at me like a drowning man looks at the shore. Then my ex-wife walked in carrying a wooden box that held 30 years of lies. Dad, we need more time, Riker was saying, his voice desperate. We'll pay, we can figure out. The conference room door opened a second time. Celine Brennan, my ex-wife who left me 30 years ago and spent the next 26 convincing our son I'd driven her away, stepped inside carrying an old wooden box. She wore the same cream slacks and silk blouse from earlier, but her face looked older now, like someone who'd finally run out of places to hide. Riker's head turned. His mouth opened. Mom, it came out in a 5-year-old's voice. Not the 30-year-old man who'd evicted his father 10 weeks ago, but the child who used to wait by the window every Sunday hoping his mother would visit. Celine didn't look at Vivian, didn't look at Montgomery or Serafina or Dorian. She walked straight to the conference table and placed the wooden box on the polished surface between the signed documents and my son's trembling hands. The room fell completely silent. Vivian found her voice first. "Celine, this is a private—" "No." Celine's voice was quiet but sharp enough to cut. "I've been private for 30 years. I'm done." She opened the box. Inside 8 handwritten letters, their envelopes yellowed with age. A stack of family photographs. And on top, a single piece of paper, a divorce certificate from 1996, the word voluntary typed in official black ink under reason for separation. Riker stared at the box like it was a bomb. "Your father never kicked me out," Celine said. She wasn't looking at me, only at Riker. "Not once. I decided to leave left for someone else because I thought he was better, richer. I thought I deserved more than a furniture store manager who worked too hard and never made enough." She picked up the divorce certificate, held it so Riker could see the signatures. Mine, hers, the judge's stamp. "I signed this voluntarily," she said, walked out with 2 suitcases and didn't look back. "Your father called me every month for the first year asking if I wanted to see you. I said I needed time, then I stopped answering." Riker's face had gone pale. "But you told me when I was 15, you told me—" "What I told you when you were 15 was a lie," Celine's voice cracked. "I called because I was afraid of losing you forever. My new marriage had failed. I had nothing. I wanted a reason for why I left, so I gave you one, told you your father drove me away, that he was cold and distant and impossible to live with." She pulled out one of the letters. I recognized my own handwriting, younger, messier, desperate. "He wrote me every month for 5 years, she said, asking if I was okay, asking if I needed anything, sending me half his paycheck because he thought I might be struggling. I cashed every check and never wrote back." I could have told him the truth 26 years ago, could have destroyed his mother's image and kept his love, but what kind of father makes his son choose? Riker looked at me, really looked at me. His eyes were wet. "You never said anything," he whispered. "You loved your mother," I said simply. "That was worth more than being right." Vivian stepped forward, her voice sharp with panic. "This is manipulation. Prescott probably paid you to—" "He didn't pay me anything." Celine finally turned to face Vivian. "Montgomery Ashford called me 3 days ago and asked if I was ready to tell the truth. I said yes because I'm tired of watching my son destroy the only parent who ever actually loved him." The silence that followed felt like falling. Montgomery remained perfectly still at the head of the table. Dorian had stopped taking notes. And Serafina was watching Riker with those gray eyes, measuring something I couldn't name. Then she placed a thin file on the table. "Mr. Hale," she said quietly, "there's one more thing you should know." Riker looked up, his face already broken. "What else could there possibly be?" Serafina opened the file. Inside, payslips. Mine. Dated 2010 through 2014, each one showing base salary from my furniture store job and additional income from something called Westminster Adult Learning Center. 4 years of night shifts at a private tutoring center, Serafina said. Teaching English and mathematics to adult students. Your father worked his furniture store job from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., then drove across town to teach from 6 p.m. to midnight 5 nights a week. She pulled out a highlighted summary page. Total extra earnings over 4 years, $64,300. 4 years of waking before dawn. 4 years of teaching other people's children at night so mine could have a future. He never knew. I never told him. Riker's hand moved slowly across the table, picking up one of the payslips. I watched him read the dates. 2010, his freshman year at University of Colorado. 2014, his graduation. "The scholarship you mentioned every Thanksgiving," Serafina said. "The one you were so proud of, the one that proved you'd earned your independence without your father's help. There was no scholarship.
Just a father who worked 16-hour days for 4 straight years so you wouldn't have to. The payslip slipped from Riker's fingers. Vivian grabbed his arm. Riker, we need to leave. We can talk to a lawyer. We can fight this. For the first time in years, maybe the first time since they'd married, Riker pushed his wife's hand away. Not roughly, just firmly. A man reclaiming space that had been taken from him one manipulation at a time. Vivian's mouth opened in shock. Riker stood there surrounded by the evidence of 3 decades of sacrifice he'd mistaken for neglect. 8 letters he'd never seen. Photographs of a father who smiled in every picture despite being abandoned. A divorce certificate that rewrote his entire childhood. Pay slips proving the scholarship that built his pride was actually his father's secret poverty. His hand was still raised where he'd pushed Vivian away. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since he was a child. What have I done? I held my son back in the hallway after everyone else left. Montgomery had taken Celine to a separate office. Serafina and Dorian disappeared into the elevator. Vivian stood at the far end of the hall, arms crossed, waiting for her husband like a sentry guarding territory she'd already lost. The hallway was empty except for us. No witnesses, no lawyers, just a father and son who'd spent 10 weeks destroying each other. You have 30 days to leave that house, I said. Riker's face was pale, his eyes red. He nodded once. This isn't punishment, I continued. It's consequence. You signed those papers, the house is mine, but I'm not throwing you into the street tomorrow morning. He looked at his shoes, the same expensive leather shoes Vivian had probably convinced him to buy for this signing. Your $320,000 debt now belongs to me, I said. I won't demand payment immediately, but I need you to understand something. I need you to stand up for yourself. Not for my money, not for your wife's plans, for yourself. Riker's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Your mother left, I said quietly. That's the truth she needed to tell. But you can't use that as an excuse for what you did to me. Understand? He nodded again, eyes wet but still silent. Down the hallway, Vivian shifted her weight, checking her watch. She couldn't hear us from that distance, but she was watching, always watching. I could have destroyed him completely, could have demanded immediate payment on the debt, could have evicted him the same day he'd evicted me. But that wasn't why I'd done this. I'd orchestrated this entire plan not to crush my son, but to show him what accountability looked like, to make him see the consequences of letting someone else dictate his moral compass. 30 days, I repeated. After that, you'll need to find your own place, your own life, without anyone telling you what to think. My son's eyes were red but dry. He'd run out of tears somewhere between his mother's confession and the scholarship reveal, and all I wanted was to hug him like I did when he was 5. But he was 30 now, and some lessons can't be learned through comfort. He finally found his voice. I'm sorry. 2 words, barely a whisper. I know, I said. That was all. I walked past him toward the elevator, leaving him standing in that empty hallway with 30 days to figure out who he was without his mother's lies and his wife's manipulation. 2 weeks passed. I spent most of that time at the Blackthorn estate in Cherry Creek, learning how to be wealthy, learning how to be someone's heir. Serafina taught me about the portfolio. Montgomery walked me through legal structures I'd never imagined existed. Edmund showed me photographs of relatives I'd never known. Then on a Tuesday morning, Serafina arrived at my door with a folder that changed everything. 3 bank records with forged signatures, she said, spreading papers across my new desk. A mahogany antique that probably cost more than my annual salary used to be. She tried to transfer money before the sale closed. The signatures were crude attempts at my handwriting, close enough to fool a casual glance, not good enough to fool forensic analysis. Vivian, I said. It wasn't a question. Vivian, Serafina confirmed. She attempted 3 separate transfers in the week leading up to the signing. The bank flagged 2 of them. The 3rd went through for $4,800 before they caught it. Montgomery arrived an hour later with worse news. Wells Fargo flagged a secret account. he said, placing another folder on top of Serafina's. $180,000 withdrawn over the past 8 months using your son's signature. Your son didn't authorize it. I picked up the documents, saw Riker's name signed in handwriting that wasn't quite his, saw withdrawals dated back to last October, long before the eviction, long before any of this started. Would she have stopped if I hadn't caught her? How many signatures had she forged before this? How many small thefts hidden in joint accounts and trust? Does he know? I asked. Montgomery shook his head. He will soon. The court issued a freeze order this morning. He'll receive notification directly. 3 days later, I got the call from Riker. He didn't ask for help, didn't ask for money, just said in a voice that sounded decades older than 30, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I believe you, I said. What do I do? You tell the truth. You cooperate with the investigation. You let the law handle it. There was a long silence on the line. She's saying it's a mistake, Riker said finally. She's saying the bank got it wrong. The bank didn't get it wrong. Another silence. Then, will you testify? If they ask me to, I said. But this isn't about revenge, Riker. It's financial fraud. If I don't report it, someone else becomes her next victim. Maybe your next wife, maybe some stranger. This has to stop. The prosecution moved fast. Subpoenas were issued within a week. Vivian received hers on a Thursday morning. By Sunday night, she was gone. Packed 2 suitcases, bought a one-way ticket to Phoenix, and left without looking back. Serafina's investigator tracked her to Arizona, then to a suburb of Scottsdale, then to an apartment complex that advertised month-to-month leases. Riker didn't follow. I know because Montgomery told me. No because Serafina confirmed it. No because on Monday morning Riker was still in Denver, still in that house, counting down the final 12 days of his 30-day grace period. Montgomery handed me one final document the following week, Vivian's divorce filing submitted from Arizona 4 days after she left. She was already moving on. Riker needed to know, but not from me. Not anymore. 3 weeks after the signing, I stopped thinking about what my son took from me and started thinking about what I could give back. Montgomery's office felt different that morning. Sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver. The city looked cleaner from the 28th floor, less desperate, as if poverty only existed at ground level where people like me used to sleep in their cars. Serafina arrived carrying a file marked Confidential Edmund Blackthorne. She placed it on the conference table between Montgomery and me. Edmund Blackthorne held $28 million in Blackthorne assets illegally through a Delaware shell company. 6 years after his father died, 6 years of keeping money that belonged to your family. I opened the file. Bank statements, corporate filings. A paper trail showing how Cornelius Blackthorne's son had hidden money in offshore accounts, shell companies, and real estate trusts, all of it technically belonging to the Blackthorne estate, all of it legally mine. He knows we found it, Serafina continued. He's willing to settle within 48 hours to avoid prosecution. Montgomery leaned back in his leather chair. The choice is yours. We can pursue criminal charges for concealing evidence of the kidnapping, or we can accept the settlement and recover the full amount. I thought about Edmund Blackthorne. Somewhere in Arizona, a man I'd never met was sitting in his lawyer's office, terrified of prison, offering to return money his father had stolen from my family. I don't want Edmund in jail, I said. Montgomery raised an eyebrow. You understand he knew about the kidnapping. He concealed evidence that could have reunited you with your biological family decades ago. His father did something terrible, I said. Edmund only benefited, but that $28 million could build something much better than revenge. The son of my kidnapper was sitting in Arizona, terrified of prison, offering to return money his father stole from my family. I could have destroyed him. Instead, I thought of Gideon under a bridge, and I chose something else. Serafina made a note. Montgomery nodded slowly. The settlement is final, Montgomery said. The money returns to the estate. 48 hours later, the full amount transferred into Blackthorne Holdings accounts. Money that had been hidden for 6 years, now available to do something that mattered. A week after that, I went back to the Lawrence Street Bridge, not as a homeless man this time, as someone with a plan. Gideon and Tessa were there sitting in the same spots they'd occupied when I'd known them. Gideon with his briefcase chained to his wrist. Tessa wrapped in the same brown coat she'd worn the night she shared her bread with me. "Prescott," Gideon said, standing up slowly. His eyes were wary, like he wasn't sure if I'd remember him now that I was wealthy. "I need to talk to both of you," I said. "Not here, at my office." They exchanged glances. Tessa's hand went to the medical alert bracelet on her wrist, an old habit checking to make sure it was still there. "It's not trouble," I added quickly. "It's the opposite." An hour later, they sat in Montgomery's conference room. Gideon kept his briefcase in his lap. Tessa perched on the edge of her chair like she might need to run. I told them about the Blackthorne inheritance, about the money Edmund had returned, about the plans Serafina and Montgomery had been drawing up for the past 2 weeks. "Gideon," I said, turning to the old engineer, "Montgomery tells me you have grounds for a patent lawsuit against your former company. The Blackthorne legal team will back your case. This time you'll have Denver's best lawyers." Gideon's grip on the briefcase tightened. "I can't afford—" "It's already paid for," Montgomery said gently. "We handle this pro bono backed by Blackthorne Holdings." Tessa was crying before I even got to her part. "The Blackthorne Hope Center opens in 2 months, I said. It's being built on Lawrence Street above the bridge where we met. We need a director of health programs, someone who understands the system, who knows what homeless people actually need, not what bureaucrats think they need." "Me," Tessa whispered. "You," I confirmed. "Salary, benefits, and a budget to build the programs you know will work." She pressed both hands to her face, shoulders shaking. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but clear. "Not for the money," she said quietly. "After 3 years overlooked by the system, someone finally noticed." 15 years. Gideon carried those drawings through 5 winters, 6 evictions, 100 sleepless nights, never selling them, never giving up, just waiting for someone to believe him. "Can I see them?" I asked, nodding toward the briefcase. Gideon hesitated. Then slowly he unlocked the chain from his wrist for the first time since I'd met him. The briefcase clicked open. Inside, a roll of yellowed technical drawings, edges worn from years of careful handling. He unrolled them across the conference table, detailed schematics for industrial valve systems, calculations in precise handwriting, patent numbers circled in red ink. 15 years I kept it, Gideon said, his voice rough with emotion. It was the first time I'd ever seen him smile. Montgomery leaned forward, studying the drawings with professional interest. "These are good, very good. We'll file the lawsuit within the week." Serafina took photographs of each page, documenting everything. Tessa reached across the table and squeezed Gideon's hand, 2 people who'd survived together under a bridge, now sitting in a boardroom planning their futures. As we left the meeting, Tessa asked, "When will the Hope Center actually open?" Montgomery checked his tablet. 2 months if construction stays on schedule. 2 months until the Lawrence Street Bridge underpass would have a building above it, a place where invisible people could finally be seen. 6 months passed before I saw my son again, and when I did, he was wearing a green volunteer shirt. The Blackthorne Hope Center opened on a Saturday morning in April, 6 months after Montgomery had checked his tablet and promised 2 months if construction stayed on schedule. It took longer than expected. Permits, delayed inspections, extended Denver weather being Denver weather, but it opened. Over 200 people came. Reporters from the Denver Post, city council representatives, social workers and case managers, and people who'd spent years working in homeless services. And in the back rows, sitting quietly, people who actually needed the place, men and women who looked like I'd looked 6 months ago, unsure if they belonged in a room this warm. Gideon stood near the front in a suit that probably cost more than everything he'd owned under the bridge. Tessa wore a blue dress and her new Director of Health Programs badge pinned to her collar. The speeches were what you'd expect. Montgomery talked about investment. Serafina discussed programs. The mayor said something about Denver taking care of its own. Then Jacob Whitfield walked to the microphone. I'd last seen him on a -8-degree night hypothermic and barely conscious when I'd covered him with my only jacket. He looked different now, healthier, steadier, the kind of different that happens when someone gets housing and medication and 3 meals a day. I'm not good with speeches, Jacob said, gripping the microphone stand like it might run away. But I want to say something about Prescott Blackthorne. The room fell quiet. He took off his only jacket and covered me, Jacob said simply. That's all you need to know about Prescott Blackthorne. The applause started soft, then grew. I stood at the back of the hall, uncomfortable with attention, looking anywhere except at the crowd. That's when I saw him. Riker. Back row, far corner. Not in a suit. Not in the expensive clothes Vivian used to pick out for him. A green volunteer shirt with the Hope Center logo, jeans and sneakers worn enough to have been walked in. He was applauding. Our eyes met across the room. He nodded once. I nodded back. That was all. But it was enough. 3 months later, on a Sunday morning in July, someone knocked on my door. I opened it, expecting a delivery. Instead, Riker stood there in a casual t-shirt holding a white bakery box tied with string. The same kind of box I used to bring home every Sunday when he was 5, filled with cookies from the bakery on Colfax. Can I come in? He asked quietly. I stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, not the conference room table at Blackthorne Holdings, not Montgomery's office, but the old scratch table at 2847 Oakwood Drive. The house was mine now, but I still thought of it as the place where this all started. I poured coffee. He opened the bakery box. Chocolate chip cookies, just like I used to buy. We didn't say much. He asked about the Hope Center. I asked about his job. He'd found work at a nonprofit, something with budgets and grant writing, nothing glamorous but honest. He mentioned the volunteer shifts every Tuesday and Thursday. I mentioned Gideon's patent lawsuit settling in his favor. Outside Denver, snow melted into spring runoff. Inside, we sat in silence, not the angry kind, not the resentful kind. Just silence, comfortable, almost peaceful. 26 years, my son believed I'd driven his mother away. 3 months it took me to prove I hadn't. But the silence over Sunday coffee that took 9 months of him watching me help strangers before he understood what kind of man I'd always been. He left after an hour, said he'd come back next Sunday if that was okay. I said it was. The door closed quietly behind him. 1 year after the signing, exactly 1 year after I'd stood in that conference room and watched my son's face drain of color, I went back to Lawrence Street Bridge. Not to sleep, not to remember what it felt like to be homeless, just to see. The old cardboard was gone. The makeshift shelters, the tarps, the desperate architecture of survival, all replaced by clean concrete and the entrance to the Hope Center. Warm light spilled from the windows. I could hear voices inside, laughter, conversation, the sound of people who had somewhere to be. I stood in the exact spot where I used to sleep, where Gideon had found me that first night and shared his bridge, where Tessa had given me bread when I had nothing to offer in return, where Jacob had nearly frozen before I covered him with my jacket. Through the window I could see the communal kitchen. Tessa was showing a group of new volunteers how to prepare meals, gesturing, explaining, teaching people how to help. One of the volunteers was wearing a green shirt. What is revenge, really? Is it watching your enemy suffer, or is it becoming so complete in yourself that their cruelty can't define you anymore? I'd spent weeks planning how to make my son understand what he'd done. Buying his house, purchasing his debt, orchestrating the perfect reveal at the signing. But the real revenge, the kind that actually mattered, wasn't any of that. The real revenge was this: living strong enough, living with such dignity, that the person who abandoned you finally sees your true worth and understands they threw away the most precious thing they ever had. Not through words, not through confrontation, through the quiet, relentless proof of who you've always been. My son had evicted me because he believed I was worthless. Now he volunteered twice a week at a center built by the homeless father he'd thrown away, not because I demanded it, but because he'd finally seen what I was worth. That was revenge. That was justice. That was grace. I turned away from the bridge and walked toward the streetlights. Behind me, the Hope Center glowed warm against the cold Denver night, built on the exact spot where I'd once been invisible. I didn't need to look back. I'd already seen everything I needed to see. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Revenge isn't about destruction. It's about reclaiming your dignity. I spent 10 weeks homeless because I didn't see the warning signs in my own son. I ignored how Vivian manipulated him, how he changed over the years. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait until you lose everything to recognize toxic patterns in your family. If someone you love treats you as disposable, that's not love. That's betrayal. And family betrayal revenge isn't always about justice. Sometimes it's about survival. What I learned from these family Reddit stories, my own and others, is that the strongest revenge isn't making someone suffer. It's showing them what they lost by treating you poorly. This story taught me that you can't control how people treat you, but you can control who you become after betrayal. I believe God allowed me to experience homelessness so I could build something meaningful. The Hope Center exists because I understood what invisible people need. Stories like these family Reddit stories remind us justice isn't always immediate, but it's always possible when you refuse to let cruelty define your worth. If this story resonated with you, please leave a comment. Tell me what you think about family betrayal revenge and how you'd handle situations like mine. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in stories of resilience and second chances, subscribe to Dad's Silent Revenge. Your support helps me share more stories that matter. Thank you for staying until the very end. Some details in this story about family betrayal revenge have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes, but the lessons are real. May you never have to face what I did.